peacefully, but sometimes angrily. And I think it was virtually unprecedented for a big city department to be there and to listen and to take it in and to understand. And you could see in the faces, in the emotion of the chief, of Chief Paysinger, of the Inspector General, and of me also. I think it was an important thing, and I'm proud of the department, and I feel like we have a lot more work to do. I was glad to be invited. Okay.
We do have a comment card on this item. Ted Hayes.
You were there, Mr. Hayes. I saw you.
The community meeting was an excellent preemptive move, but you were preaching to the choir there. I hope you know that, because the non-choir members released their audio-video tape. It was in the realm of NWA, F the police. So they're out there. They didn't come into the house of the Lord. I doubt if that was because they didn't come, but they were out there somewhere, but they didn't show up. So you never really got a full impact of the negative feelings of the radicals who were out there. But I think it was an excellent notion. I would hope when the other events occur in the city that on a level of the ones that occurred that prompted you to come out to the community meeting, that you also have a plan, a method to deal with it. I hope you recognize there was one very serious element of truth by one of the speakers. And that was when he said, who was really killing our people? And he talked about the black-on-black crime and violence in our community. Now, the police department likes to take credit for reducing that, but that's not what's doing it. You can find out what's happening if you talk to some honest people about what the reduction in gang warfare or any other kind of criminality that exists in our community relative to blacks on blacks. One thing I'm disappointed about is other ethnic groups utilizing ethnic cleansing. I'm talking about Ramona Gardens. No one said anything about that, but it's swelling and it's mustering. Most immigrants, that's the community I live in, they recognize they live very peacefully and harmoniously among black people. They don't get the same treatment on the east side, from what I hear. Anyway, thank you for being there. I hope you're prepared to come again. Thank you again.
Item number 2, the report of Chief of Police, Chief Paysinger.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Commission, and Commissioner Soboroff. I share your comments in having had the opportunity to join you, the Chief, and my colleagues at the meeting last week. It was very beneficial in many ways to the department to have an opportunity to hear the members of the public and hear them have an opportunity to exercise their voice their concerns. I will share with you just briefly what I shared with several at the meeting that night was that 20 years ago, that conversation, that dialogue never would have taken place because in many respects, we didn't have the enhanced relationship with the community then that we have now. The fact that we had an opportunity to share in a collective way, I think is demonstrative of where the LAPD has come from, and quite frankly, the road we still have to travel. As you mentioned, and I couldn't agree more, that the work, frankly, will never be finished. Reaching out to the public is a lifelong ambition, and we have a responsibility and a moral duty to continue that work. I'd just like to look back for just 1 second and bring you up to speed on on a couple of individuals who were injured not too long ago. Mr. President, I'd like to recall Officer Nick Lee's partner. You'll recall that he was killed in a tragic traffic collision in March of this year. His partner, Officer Stephanie Galicia, she's been off for quite some time being rehabilitated from her injuries. It's my understanding that she's due back to work in about 2 weeks.
Wonderful.
I've spoken to her several times between then and now, and you can tell in her voice she's starting to recover quite nicely She was then and still is assigned to Hollywood Division, and the department will welcome her back when she returns to work. And also this morning, I had an opportunity to speak with Officer Nelson Fong. You recall that about a week or so ago, he was critically injured during a shootout with a suspect in Los Angeles at the termination of a pursuit. He received a fairly significant wound in his left calf. He remains hospitalized. When I spoke to him this morning, I actually gave him a break because he was right in the middle of physical therapy. His voice is strong. His attitude is good. Just very, very pleased that his circumstance, his situation is improving dramatically from day to day. He has good support from his family, his colleagues at Metropolitan Division, and all of the police department. I know that the chief also has spoken with him, and he's recovering nicely, and I just thought I'd share that with the commission. As it relates to our crime efforts, we're still trending in a very good direction at this time of year, which tends to be a bit problematic given the summer and all that goes with it. For Part 1 crime, we're down 6.1% in homicides, a slight uptick in sexual assaults at 8.5%. Robbery down 3.8%. Ag assault, there's been a spike at 15.4% for a total violent crime increase year to date at 5.9%. Property crimes, we're trending nicely in the reduction of burglaries at 10.4%. Motor vehicle thefts down 9%. Burglary theft from vehicles also down 10.5%. And thefts were down right at 0.6% for a total property crime reduction of nearly 7% at 6.8%. Our total Part 1 crime reduction year to date is 4.7%. By bureau, Central Bureau, slight increase overall in Part 1 crime by 0.4%. South Bureau is down 5.4%. The Valley is down 8.9%, and West Bureau is down 2.3%. Total gang crime reduction year to date is 11.4%. Lastly, Mr. President, members of the commission, about 4 weeks ago or so, we started the most recent LAPD Cadet Leadership Academy. For that academy, we received over 1,000, I believe the number was 1,003 applications. There are currently just over 800 cadets in this leadership academy, which by far eclipses the number from the last class that graduated about 6 weeks ago. I believe that number was 652. I can't be prouder of the department's outreach, not only in its traditional adult communities, but also, as importantly, the youth communities, whether it be the cadets, the junior cadets, PALS, Jeopardy, the Juvenile Impact Program. We currently have nearly 30,000 youth members of our communities in various LAPD-sponsored programs. That, too, is an investment in the future. The pennies and nickels and dimes and quarters, that investment that we put forth now, it's not a Madoff scheme. It has the potential to reap enormous dividends as we move forward in our outreach. And that concludes the
Chief, what are the ages of the 30,000? How old is the youngest, and how old is the oldest, and how long has the longest been with the program?
The youngest members of our programs are the junior cadets. They start at 9. The eldest members of any of our programs, and you should see them, by the way, are 20. They age out in many of our programs at 20. And the longest serving program is the cadets, formerly the Explorers. It has a half-century longevity with the LAPD. It started 52 years ago, I believe. It's been around for quite some time.
And if someone goes in at a very young age and stays all the way through, how many years would that be? You're saying that could be up to 11 years?
If you start with the junior cadets, from 9 until 20.
And what if you start with the regular cadets?
They start at 13 years old.
It's wonderful.
So they could be lifers of the organization.
Very wonderful.
I have
Sure.
I guess a comment and a question. As I recall, the largest funder is the Ray Charles Foundation.
Yes, ma'am, it is.
The cadets.
So, again, thank you to them for absolutely funding such a program. What I wonder is, if there's not an opportunity to have, and maybe there is, on some of the college campuses, where I think what we talked about before was some of the cadets go to some colleges in the area, so much so that they probably could have meetings on campus. And to the extent that there's an alumni association, I don't know that that exists, but it might be valuable for us to take a look at, because on the heels of the the gang year-over-year reduction, gang crime is 11%. You got to kind of wonder if there's not some correlation. I keep wanting to know if there's a correlation, and someday you're going to tell me if there is, but I kind of think there is. But I wonder about extending I'll call it the brand of the cadets beyond the age of 20.
Thank you, Commissioner Madison. A couple of things in response to your point about going back and doing the legislative history, so to speak, of the former cadets. We're actually capturing that data now. There are many members of the LAPD currently serving that have history in that program. One that comes to mind immediately is Chief Green. Chief Green was an explorer back in the day, and they number in the hundreds. Many of our current youth service officers that currently serve were former cadets. And so it's just a matter of going back and getting all that data, which we are capturing now, to the point of having a post on the campus of USC. They actually have one with USC Police Department of Public Safety, where Chief John Thomas is the chief. Like the LAPD version, their brand is growing tremendously. I'm actually meeting on September 8th with President Max Nikias.
Commissioner Kim, good luck. We'll be listening on council phone. We'll interrupt our meeting to listen to your discussion. Okay.
Good luck, Commissioner. And so that work is currently ongoing. Your comments, your recommendations were not lost on the good chief. It's just a matter of moving forward with them.
Okay,
Thank
let's move
you.
on.
We have a comment card on this item, and just for the record, Commissioner Figueroa Villa arrived during the chief's comments. Ted Hayes.
Traffic is horrible.
The community meeting, 250 people. Chief Beck was speaking. Some one person in the back of the audience shouted out, and Chief Beck launched into a plea to please respect me. That's not the way you do it. You've got the mic, you've got the amplification, and you ought to have a strategy for what we used to call in the 60s agent provocateurs. I flashed back immediately to MacArthur Park. 6 guys with bandanas on throwing rocks at police officers. The police department responds by declaring an unlawful assembly and moving 3,000 people out of the park with 3 different kinds of projectiles, gas, clubs, and all that. They have no program for the 6 agent provocateurs. So we all suffer. That's called mass punishment. Now, maybe you don't have a handbook about how to handle agent provocateurs, how to handle 6 people out of 3,000. But you should. And you should never respond to someone shouting out. Just keep on talking in the microphone. Maybe you can offer a plea that the public, the people around them, will oust them verbally, throw the rascals out. Believe it or not, if you've got the few sentences you can utter to the public will silence those provocateurs, and some will throw them out. So I really believe the department must have a method of dealing with provocateurs who are always less numerous in a mob than the people who are there to protest or complain. I can't give you my handbook. It's secret property. But there is a handbook that we were given back in the old days about how to deal with provocateurs such as COINTELPRO.
Item number 3, report of the Executive Director, Mr. T. Fang.
Good morning, Mr. President, members of the Commission. A very brief item for the Department and Public's information. There will be no meeting next Tuesday, September 2nd, due to the Labor Day weekend. Our next regularly scheduled meeting after today will be on Tuesday, September 9th, and that concludes my report.
Item Item number 4, report of the Inspector General. Mr. Bustamante.
Good morning, Commissioners. Just a brief update on some of our community outreach efforts. We've been meeting with several of the community outreach groups in the Los Angeles area. As recently as yesterday, I met with representatives at Churla, sat down and discussed some of the concerns they have about policing in the area, and we came to some ways to actually address some of those issues, and we'll continue those dialogues. And that concludes my report.
Item number 5 consists of information items and filed items relative to noise variances and special event permits submitted for the period ending August 22nd, 2014. Item number 6, presentations. Are there
None
any?
today.
No presentations. Okay. Item number 7, there are no items for the consent agenda. Item number 8, regular items. Would any commissioner wish to pull any
I'd
item?
like to pull B.
I'd also like to pull 8E and 8G.
E and G. Okay.
I would move approval of items 8C, 8D, and 8F.
Second.
Second, all those in favor, I want to commend Mitch Englander on the great idea of this Medina alert system's pretty cool. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so let's start with B. So we have B, E, and G.
You have item A, sir, a verbal report.
Oh, I'm
from
sorry.
CPAB.
Thank you.
Oops, sorry, guys. This is Mission CPAB. Welcome.
I'm sorry, if I could just read the item for the record. 8A, verbal presentation and update from the commanding officer and Community Police Advisory Board representative regarding community initiative, problem solving, crime strategies, and other programs and goals within the mission area.
Thank you very much. Board, thank you very much. Chief Piesinger, thank you very much for this time. I'd like to introduce my partners. I have my CPAP co-chair, Betty Lay, and then my patrol partner
Betty.
here, Lee Sands. And we're going to give you a brief presentation on our CPAP out in Mission area.
I'm sorry, sir, if they, you can spell and state your name for the record.
Absolutely. Betty?
My name, Betty Lay, L-E-Y.
Lee Sands, S-A-N-D-S.
Thank you.
You got mine? Todd Chamberlain.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity to come and share what we're doing in our mission CPAP. We have specific goals this year to help improve the communication between our citizens and LAPD, so I really appreciated hearing you, Steve, of what you were talking about. And I think a lot of it has to do with both. Especially the community. They need to, get more involved and understand it better, which I think is a great opportunity. Also including trying to improve our communication with our membership. And I had pamphlets passed out, hopefully, to each of you that we're using for our membership recruitment. Our membership committee is doing a fabulous job. They have been attending every single one of the Neighborhood Watch meetings throughout Mission Division. And also we're continuing to increase our Neighborhood Watch groups. And of course, we continue monthly with working on our Lock It, Hide It, Keep It. Something else we do is all the different groups and meetings that we're involved with, and Captain Chamberlain's going to hit on that a little bit.
Yeah, the big thing with our CPAP, which is really important, is the connectivity between all our other entities that we have within that represent our mission community. We have clergy council, security council, a number of other councils, and the thing that was really important for me and also for Betty is to make sure that all these councils are connected. There's nothing worse than having a group of people who want to serve and then they're all splintered and fractioned out. And so with all of those councils, we have our CPAP representation that's there, and they communicate constantly via email and text and everything else, and it really serves the purpose well. And an example of that, Our Clergy Council Steering Committee works very strongly with our CPAP group. We have done a number of programs in our Clergy Council that impacts the issues that we have as far as crime and impacts the community issues as far as their crime. And some of those have involved truth about gangs, truth about drugs, and now we're doing a new one that's called Truth About Domestic Violence. It's a series we looked at as a group, as a consortium of all of us, and said, what can we impact? And we have our first Truth About Domestic Violence because we see AGS on an increase, and domestic violence is one of those very unique, difficult ones to impact because it's unfortunately done behind closed doors. But we are moving forward with that. We have our first meeting in September the 13th for that. It's going to be at Our Lady of Peace, and then we have numbers that follow after that. Another big part of it is Operation Ceasefire, mission that's been a big component for us. It was founded from David Kennedy and John Jay College. And to date, we have had a total of 11 call-ins in about 2.5 years, and we have impacted about 287 gang members. And what's important about that is how ceasefire works is that it's not coming just from the LAPD, it's not coming just from Todd, but I get to turn back and I say, this mandate to stop violence, and these are all gang members that are in attendance on parole, and I said the mandate to stop violence comes not from me, it comes from the community. And for each one of our ceasefires, we have had the CPAP community there in strength. And when these people look back, they see the community is no longer going to tolerate violence. And years to date, since we've implemented CPAP, we've had a 64% reduction in non-fatal hits, a 48% reduction in our victims hit, and then we have had 29% reduction in shots fired. And again, that is the relationship between the PD mission area and our CPAP.
Have you ever had gang members, or do you recruit any, ex-gang members into the CPAP?
You know what?
To get a perspective from the...
Yeah, that's been really important for us, and I'll let Betty talk a little bit about that too, but our outreach to our community. You mentioned about going into the communities that might not be strongly represented. For us, we have almost a built-in pool. With our cadet program, we're trying to get the parents. Most of our cadets come from high-risk at youth, our very densely populated Panorama City, and I want to get those parents to come in and be part of our CPAP, and so we're really outreaching that when they drop off their parents, we're trying to stop them and work out flyers. In regards to the gangs, again, the connectivity between all of the units, in our clergy council, I'd say probably 60% of our clergy council is made up of organizations. We wanted to focus on the grassroots, the Victory Outreach churches, the churches that reach out to those communities. And there's many that are involved in prior gang activity, prior narcotics, and it really does open a different arena for us to get their perspective. Also in our CPAP this year, it was interesting. Our community is so diverse and our demographics is so diverse. We actually have a CPAP member who is undocumented. So that really brings it in another perspective that we have not had. And I think that was something that was pivotal for us because we want our CPAP to represent the community that we serve.
Well, and to answer your question about gang members or reformed gang members, is we also have some of the Victory Outreach members that come and attend our CPAP meetings who are reformed past gang members. So yes, to that question.
Get those perspectives are important.
Yes, very much so. And we have several CPAP members that are also involved with our community, with the community impact team now, with the gang unit, with Lieutenant Garza at the station. So we're trying to set it up through him where he has meetings. 1 month will be in the mornings, and next month it'll be in the evenings, so that different ones that are available can attend, whether it's morning or evening meetings, to get us all together in the same room. So that's a big plus, I think. And then we also had an extremely successful National Night Out this year, and I know Captain was very impressed, so I'd like him to extend a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm going to have my partner. If you could hit up our National Night Out and what you did.
Yeah, the National Night Out was a great event. It brought a lot of people out of the community. It showed the interaction between the police department and the community that we serve. The volunteers that were there were outstanding. I mean, just to see the camaraderie between us and them, and the amount of people that you probably wouldn't normally see at an event like that did show up was outstanding. So this is my first National Night Out event at Mission. Apparently the ones in the past have been just as successful, and I'm sure the ones in the future will be the same.
Great.
And with that, I'm real excited to still be captain's co-chair. It just,
He's afraid to demote you, he told me in the hall.
say that again, Steve?
Afraid to demote you, you're too good.
It's not going to happen.
Got to have a succession plan, though.
Succession plan is always in place, but unfortunately,
But
we're
thanks for all
very
you
secure.
do, and thanks for.
Well, I appreciate it, and I know I also have support from Assistant Chief Paysinger, too. We go way back as well, so. And I would like to, again, this is the second year, I'm inviting you October 8th to our Officer Appreciation Day event. It'll be Wednesday. We're serving you breakfast, lunch, and dinner starting at 6:30 in the morning, Earl.
Oh, I know your frustration.
7:30 at night.
May I respond to your frustration, okay? And tell you why I'm not going to go. I'm going to tell you. Because if I go to one, I go to all of them. And so what I'd like to do is go to, like when they're groups together, so I don't have to go to 21 breakfasts and 21 lunches and 21 dinners. Not that I don't love you.
So I can't put in my newsletter that the president at least made it to our special
You can put it in your
event?
newsletter. You'd be lying, but you could put it in there. It's okay.
I think when the overall CPAB event happens, we go. We have gone to that, but we've not gone to the
If
individual
you have a true
ones.
emergency, like really big, then give me a ring.
Okay, there's
Offline.
a big emergency. We've got the jukebox confirmed for the event. Thank you guys very much. I really appreciate it.
For all you do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Item 8B, Inspector General's report dated August 13th, 2014, relative to the review of the Los Angeles Police Department's early warning system.
Thank you, Commissioners. At the table in front of you is Assistant Inspector General Kevin Rogan from my office. It's his section that was responsible for this report. He heads the audit and complaint section in my office. By the way of background, as is spelled out in the report, this early warning system was developed in 2007 during the consent decree, and the system was designed specifically to locate or identify police officers that presented risks to the department. And the system would look at several items, and those items, among others, were uses of force, complaints, vehicle pursuits, preventable traffic collisions, and compare them to the remaining population of the officers at LAPD and try to identify ones that were posed a risk or were deviant in the sense that they were at a higher risk or likely to pose an issue to the department. Now, over the last several years, there have been audits of the early warning system, but those audits have really just superficially looked at whether the mechanics of the process worked. This audit was really looking at a much deeper look. Even though we had a relatively small snapshot in time, we were trying to look at the efficiency of the system and identify whether it is doing what it purports to be doing and if there are any shortcomings in the system. So what we endeavor to do with this report is look at 748 action items. The way the system generally works is when the system identifies a officer that may pose a risk to the department, it shoots out or produces an action item, essentially an alert to the command. That command is given that alert, and then they have to make a decision on what to do and how to treat that alert. And the idea is that alert will present the command and the supervisors an opportunity to get ahead of the behavior and potentially prevent any further risk or any further issues developing within the department. So when we looked at the snapshot of time and looked at the 748 action items during that time period, what we really found is that about 74% of those action items resulted in no department action, and 22.5% of them resulted in an informal meeting, not a comment card or an official reprimand, but just an informal meeting, with only 3% resulting in any substantive action by the department. The process also, when we were looking at it, appears to create a considerable amount of additional work for supervisors. So with the 748 action items, every supervisor in that chain is going to have to look and address this particular issue and see if it's appropriate. And so whether it is successful or not, it's still going to create a lot of extra additional work for supervisors that have to deal with these. The other part of our review looked at some of the terminations that happened within the department over the last couple years to try to identify how successful that system was in identifying some of these officers that were terminated and see if there were any early warnings, any flags that the system presented to supervisors before the actual termination. And what we found was that 75% of the cases, there were no action items generated or just one for the officers that were terminated. And often that one action item was the alert for the actual misconduct that led to the termination. And then of the remaining 25% of the cases, there did not appear to be a correlation between the action of the officer that ultimately led to the termination and the prior alerts. So what we've done in communicating with the department and discussing with them is try to identify ways to improve the system going forward. It looks like the department is already trying to address that issue by tightening up the system. We agree with that and recommend that they try to work with whoever they deem is appropriate to find a better way to analyze officers' behavior and hopefully strengthen the system where we don't have so many false positives and that we actually are able to alert, have meaningful alerts that supervisors can delve into and then address behavior that may be out of the norm. And pending any questions that you may have, I'm here, and Assistant Inspector General Kevin Rogan is also here.
Questions? Rob, do you want to start?
Sure. Excuse me. I have a number of specific questions, both for the department and for the Inspector General, but I just want to start by giving my perspective, and maybe it's wrong, and if it is, you can correct me. Inspector General referred back to the consent decree, and my understanding is when the department was under the consent decree, the independent monitor was quite clear that Teams 2 was a critical success factor in accumulating the good information that would accurately and quickly identify officers at risk for failing to meet the standards the department had set up. In the final report of the independent monitor, which goes back to June of 2009, the monitor reported the following. Teams 2 has begun to facilitate a significant change in management practices. The system's success within the department and the accompanying recognition from both law enforcement agencies and academia sets Teams 2 as a model for law enforcement agencies. That sounds to me like the description of a system that's working quite successfully. The Inspector General's audit now, on the other hand, concludes the early warning system requires a substantial commitment from department personnel while providing limited predictive capabilities. And I'm trying to understand whether those are consistent or inconsistent. And I guess that's my first question, both to the Inspector General and to the department. Do you view those as inconsistent or consistent, or am I looking at apples and oranges?
Good morning, Maggie Goodrich, Chief Information Officer. So if I may walk through a few points, I think I'll address your question. First of all, the intent, I think, of the system was stated in what you just described there in the monitor's report a number of years ago, and that is an accumulation of information about an employee in one location that the system was in all sort of disparate silos. And the ability to provide a supervisor with that information in one place and ensure that supervisors know what their employees are doing was critical to the success of the system. We have, in fact, achieved that. We have a system with the data in one place, with action items being triggered for employees and requiring that supervisor to do a review. One point of clarification in the Inspector General's audit, it indicates a finding of no action or a result of no action. I just want to clarify what that means. Every action item is reviewed by a supervisor, and every action item review includes a one-on-one discussion with the affected employee. of what that review consisted of and what the recommended disposition will be. So when you see no action, it means no action other than the meeting and review that has already taken place. Nothing else formal, such as a comment card or something like that. So I want to be clear about that. That said,
Can I just stop you there? So what's the difference between no action and informal meeting?
so
If every action item results in review by a supervisor and a meeting between the supervisor and the employee, what does it mean to have an informal meeting as distinct from no action?
an informal meeting, it means that the supervisor has identified a behavior during their review that needs to be addressed, and then they have an informal meeting, which is essentially a counseling session about that behavior. So I see the confusion. There are essentially two informal meetings, right? The first one is a review. Here's what I looked at. Here's what I analyzed. Here's my recommendation out of that process is the first sort of informal meeting. The second one that you're referring to is now I've identified a behavior that we need to discuss. Some sort of counseling session essentially takes place between a supervisor and an employee.
So in the first one, what's the conclusion of that meeting? The conclusion of that meeting isn't that the supervisor says to the employee, this is something you need to work on? I'm just trying to understand how. I still don't. I understand what you said, but I don't understand if the first meeting doesn't lead to anything, what it actually is.
This Assistant Chief Sandy Jo MacArthur, and you are identifying exactly the points that the Inspector General identified.
Right, I'm not wrong.
There's a lot of things that when we started building the system in 2003 that were in place solely because that's the way the monitor believed it would work.
Okay.
And the department had a lot of concerns because there was some ambiguity, which in our earlier audits, when we were still under the consent decree, showed the concerns about some of the issues you're bringing up now. As we moved forward through the process, you have to remember this was something that was built many years ago. Technology has increased and improved. And so today the system is not the way it was identified in 2009 as the model. It's still a model in terms of most agencies are still doing paper files, siloed systems.
So the collection?
So the collection of data has been incredibly useful to this organization, and that in and of itself was huge. But today, we concur totally with the Inspector General that we need to now look at the system, which is why we've embarked on the research project with an independent third-party person who can come in and do an analysis. Because one of the things we don't like is to have officers or supervisors spending a lot of time with officers on unnecessary contacts. We'd rather them in the field and mentoring and monitoring and supervising in the field. So we, because of how important this was to coming out of the consent decree, we wanted to have somebody independent of the police department look at it, and then working with the Inspector General and the police department, we will then take their recommendations and figure out what will help us move into the next decade and actually hopefully become more efficient, more effective, and not, I hate to use the word, not waste our time, but that's something what's happened. But there was a lot of ambiguity.
I appreciate that. I do now understand better that the collection process seems to be working quite well.
Huge.
Whether we're collecting the right things or not is up for discussion.
Rob, before you go forward, let me back up and try and catch up a little bit on this, okay? Because some of this you've got a lot of time and experience with that I, for one, don't. When the government mandated this project, was it a national mandate to big cities, or was it just to us by virtue of the consent decree?
A requirement to us by virtue of the consent decree.
When they mandated it, they gave this this global statement. Did they give any information on hey, here's what other people have done, here's some best practices, here's what our expectations are?
So at the time, there really weren't many other agencies even trying to embark on something like this, and so there weren't really best practices to point to.
So there were no recommendation guidelines. There was this carrot. There was something out there saying...
There was this general description, an idea of what it wanted to accomplish, and then there were detailed discussions with the DOJ and Monitor, actually well before my time, Chief MacArthur can speak to them in more detail, but the monitor and DOJ participated in the actual design of this system in great detail. Mr. Tiefenk knows as well, down to how these peer groups were defined that officers are grouped into before their performance is analyzed, what the thresholds were, what the triggers would be. The monitor and DOJ had a lot to say about that. And to the Inspector General's point, it does require a substantial commitment of resources. Sure. And at the time, again, 12 years ago, the opinion was that's okay. That commitment of resources was necessary. Those supervisors need to spend that time reviewing what their employees are doing. But I can tell you, I'm really glad that the Inspector General agrees that we need to take a deeper dive into the performance of the system, because this is something I've wanted to do for some time.
Let me go back to the basics so I can get it. Okay?
Sure.
It's a good idea, obviously. I mean, it's a good idea to. There was a reason that they recommended it, and it's a good idea. And probably other departments now around the country are doing something. And I hope that your report, this guy's going to take a long time on this report, which means it's going to cost a lot of money, but that they really do look at best practices. But my question is, as part of the ingredients to what you guys have done so far, we have a behavioral sciences unit here that's probably the most sophisticated in the country. Probably does it. And it provides services to officers, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Was that part of the in other words, when they said, okay, now create something, or was it just a bunch of computer statistics to put in and have the machine point out and say, you? Okay? Or what were the kinds of things? To me, there are a whole bunch of things that can trigger behavior. People have personal problems, they have problems with their kids, they have problems, and all kinds of things can create that. And those aren't really computerized. Those are things that happen when their leaders, when their captains, when their sergeants know. Is that part of this model? And if it isn't, I sure hope it is. This consultant just doesn't come back with a whole bunch of gibberish that goes into the computer. A lot of this is personal, common sense stuff, and it has to do with leadership. And my question was that a part of this, or was this some a bunch of algorithms?
I can speak to a little bit of that. And I know Commissioner Salzman, who's been very involved with us for years on this, understands the idea about the early warning system. It was to identify good behavior as well as behavior that may be problematic, and the whole goal of triggering it with the different equations and such was to then create a situation where a supervisor would meet with an employee when a trigger occurs to identify were there other problems, because the personal problem issue oftentimes comes into the workplace with a problem behavior. So go back to what some of your questions were, Commissioner Salzman. The idea to have these informal meetings was to find out if this was an anomaly that just kicked out, if Sandy Joe was having problems and it was starting to come into the workplace, for example, maybe not, missing court a few times, calling in sick a lot, those types of things, and then bringing in the human resources in the behavioral science side or counseling, other types of counseling, to bring it in to help Sandy Joe before she goes down the path of becoming a problematic, where it's multiple incidents flagging. So it was a guess, because there were no best practices, as Ms. Goodrich just said. It was really a guess with a lot of really great minds in the mix. And as Commissioner Soboroff, you said, there was this idea at the end that a technology could do something without sort of a human interaction piece to it. We've learned over time that we need to really look at it because technology is advanced. We will never be able to take the human component out, nor should we want to. But we need to see what can we do now as technologies advance. Some agencies have tried to look at our systems and tried to develop theirs self. So there may be best practices out there that we're not aware of. So it really is time to look at the system.
So let's swing it back to Rob, but let me just make one statement in closing, okay? Computers don't drink. Computers don't cry. Computers don't have kinds of issues that people have, okay? So you've got a new study coming up. In this new study, somebody's being hired to take this apart like a Lego thing and put it back together. when they put it back together, I have very high expectations about the common sense portion. I ain't worried one bit about all this computer razzmatazz. We're dealing about people, and so I have high expectations that there's going to be some common sense, the psychology of this kind of stuff. In addition, that they go really around and look at best practices, because what I don't want is an 18-month study just validating what we've just heard today.
Can I ask a question? If I understand, it's not just that this consultant will come in and sort of parse what's already in existence, right? But we understand that there is great value in this system because it captures in one database a lot of information that before was stored in a number of different silos.
Correct.
So you have the opportunity to at a single glance get some insight into an employee's entire work record and performance, right?
Correct.
Okay. So what we're talking about now is, now that we are out from under the consent decree, and this was a consent decree driven creation, that LAPD did not really have the ability to alter, change, whatever, without an approval of the federal government monitor, et cetera. Now that we are in this phase, we can actually take a look at what this entire system is and make whatever adjustments / tweaks, or not, because it might really be that we are looking at the conclusion of it. We might not do a whole lot different to the system other than extract a different kind of information using different kinds of filters, right?
That is correct. We are leaving it wide open to what the recommendations may be. And just to further comment on one point you made, which I think cannot be understated. In our silos, it took us years, several years, just to clean the data. What I mean, to make sure the data was accurate. And we now have an incredible system that has incredibly accurate data. And that is something that is beyond invaluable, to go back to some of the things that were said in the consent decree. And it will allow us, hopefully, to move forward, not to shelf the system, but then to help the system help us, help our employees. That's
right,
really
and I think what I'm trying to do is manage our expectations.
Yes.
I think we're going, some of us are going into this with an expectation that this is a broken system. It is actually not a broken system. What it is that the information that's being extracted is not a predictor the way the Justice Department intended for it to be. But the fact that there was, and I greatly apologize for using this term, but the sort of parachuting in, create this thing, it's going to warn us when something's going on. That's not the beginning, the middle, nor the end. It's a living, breathing process that has to continue. Now, the reality is that in order for us to make this as effective as we'd like for it to be, it's going to take a lot more money. I don't know how much a lot more money is, but I understand the system itself cost $35 million when it was initially, right, and it wasn't the department's discretion to create such a system. It was mandated. So now we have a tool, and the tool provides X amount of information, which we actually find useful. I mean, we use this information weekly when we're adjudicating our cases upstairs. I mean, it's very helpful. That's why I was concerned about it, so I don't understand, because if it's such a boondoggle and a mistake, we're relying on this mistake weekly if you guys are doing it daily. But now, cutting to the chase, I think that in the managing of expectations, this is designed to go back in and look at an existing process and figure out how we can extrapolate from that process information that we see as actually useful, right?
Yes.
No, I agree. I think, Commissioner, you hit the nail on the head. I think a lot of the things that were created during the consent decree, at the time, they might have had a value to it, but I think the department is right to reevaluate and try to strengthen some of these things, because some of the stated goals and objectives back in 2009 or earlier when things were implemented, once we've had a chance to look at them and examine how they are or not working, it kind of leads us to look at these things and possibly strengthen them. And I think that's exactly what the Chief and Maggie Goodrich are saying, is that now that they have the opportunity to go in and look at this their hope and desire is to make this a much more useful system and have some larger takeaways from it. So I think what you're going to see going forward is both the department and the IG trying to identify things that maybe maybe during the consent decree had a usefulness, but can be strengthened and be improved and create a more useful product for the commission and create a better product for the department in managing its people.
Let's go back to Rob.
I appreciate all that. In the context of your question, Steve, about sort of where we were when we started, let me explain my view of that and why I now find it quite frustrating that we're going to wait until the beginning of 2016 to begin to make some changes. The chief, you asked about sort of where we were starting. The chief's response was a very positive one, and I appreciate that. But it's pretty clear from the Inspector General's report that this goes way back. The United States Civil Rights Commission recommended these early warning systems in 1981. In 1999, I'm reading from the audit. In 1999, a significant number of large city police departments, 27%, already had established an early warning system.
Oh, wait, say that again for me.
I'm reading right from the audit. 1999, 27% of law enforcement agencies serving populations of at least 50,000 had established an early warning system.
Yep.
My point is, it's not completely accurate to say that when we began this under the consent decree, we were inventing the wheel. We were not. Now, so I just want to give that as
Yes,
a background.
and I just would add to that. We agree we weren't inventing the wheel, but when the Department of Justice looked at them, none of them were effective. So you're right. We have not.
No, I guess I'm sorry, because now let's look at the audit again. The audit, the very first thing in the audit, after citing to the 1981 Civil Rights Commission, footnote 2 cites to an article from July 2001. July 2001. Let me read something from that article. Early warning systems appear to have a dramatic effect on reducing citizen complaints and other indicators of problematic police performance among those officers subject to intervention. There are 3 examples, big cities. In Minneapolis, the average number of citizen complaints received by officers subject to early intervention dropped by 67% 1 year after the intervention. In New Orleans, that number dropped by 62% 1 year after intervention. In Miami-Dade, only 4% of the early warning cohort had 0 use of force reports prior to intervention. Following intervention, 50% had 0 use of force reports. So I have a point and a question. Point is, that goes back to 2001. And it seems to me that's a pretty straightforward way to think about an early warning system. You identify officers who may have some problematic behavior, may have some reason that's causing it. You intervene, and you've told us you do that in the vast majority of times by meeting with the officer, which makes sense. And then after that, you track the behavior of those officers to figure out whether the intervention actually worked. And in these 3 cities, it worked. And so my question is, did we do that here? Do we have that data here? And if we didn't track it, why not?
I will talk to the Inspector General about the specific tracking of specific officers, but I don't want to be argumentative. New Orleans is now under a consent decree because their early warning system didn't work. It was a temporary fix. We now have a beautiful history of our early warning system, and we can look at the other early warning systems that are out there. Dade also had some backtracking on it. And not to say I'm not trying to say this is a police department issue, but this was a city collaboration with the Department of Justice, and the police department in the beginning, didn't have a lot of say in what the early warning system would be. And what they wanted to do was to make it more successful than anything out there. We now have a system that has a tremendous amount of data. We do track the individual officers. As you all know, we have some in our system called REMAC, which have been sometimes popped from the early warning system. So we do track it, but I don't know that we have all of the data that you would like to look at based on the early warning systems you just quoted, so we can go back and look at those things. We'll work with the Inspector General on that. But we do think it's time to reevaluate this, and to answer your question, or to respond to your concern about 18 months. We are going to be working with the people who are working on the research project, and we're going to have regular meetings with us and the Inspector General and them, so that if there's things we can start doing now that they see.
Will they come and make a presentation to us, I don't say quarterly, but a couple times, and sort of tell us, hey, here's some of the new things, here's where we're going in this, so we don't, at the end of the day, read 18 months from now something that...
Right. We can certainly work with them to do that. Yeah. What they do, as you all know, is they present at the end. They meet with all of us regularly. If you would like to have more meetings publicly, we could certainly do that.
Well, my suggestion on that would be, and I agree with Steve, that you try to work that out with the consultant, but I think rather than us dealing directly with the consultant, I think it's incumbent on the department, given the years that you've been working on this and the tremendous progress you've made, but the current results, which look like it's not really being all that helpful, is that you report back to us quarterly on what are the changes that you've figured out you can make, and what are you doing about those between now and the beginning of 2016?
I agree.
Rob, let me just push back a little bit, but from my perspective is, I wouldn't mind having the consultant here, because I don't want any misinterpretation, he said, she said, and I just like to get a sense that we feel that, not that the department is going to misinterpret or misstate something, I just like to look him in the eye and get a feel for where he's going.
And I appreciate that, because the reason, so when the consent decree was formally signed off by the judge, I immediately started this process to apply for this grant funding, to bring on a third-party independent person to do this analysis. I do not believe myself or anybody that works for me is qualified to make that sort of assessment. I'm neither a statistician or an expert in research or scientific modeling or anything like that. The person that we're bringing on has a team with an area of expertise specific to criminal justice that's going to look at all of the things that you've just mentioned. I will make it very clear to them that, first of all, they need to listen to and read the transcripts from this hearing to understand your expectations. And then certainly we will have regular updates from that consulting group. It's not that we'll only hear from them 16 or 18 months from now. There are regular progress reports that are due to the grantor. And we'll have regular meetings where the Inspector General or perhaps even a subcommittee from Commission is welcome to attend and hear those updates.
And I'm not sure I don't want him to come and do a presentation here publicly.
Sure.
With you guys too.
Sure.
After a few months, just to show us where the direction.
Absolutely.
I think progress is important to document.
Yeah. I just have one comment and then a suggestion about moving forward. One of the most significant pieces of information for me in the report was that of all the action items generated, only 1.2% resulted in training. And the chief, one of the hallmarks of this chief has been the importance of training as distinct from discipline.
Yes.
And if only 1.2% of the action items are resulting in training, clearly something is disconnected.
Yep. We agree.
Okay. And so my suggestion would be that the department provide us with quarterly reports on the progress, and that, among other things, you begin now to figure out the changes you can make, including the basic data collection that I was talking about. I'm not a statistician either. But you can. It's not that hard to figure out. An action item gets generated. There's an intervention. You look at that employee's record after the intervention and whether there are further action items or not.
Can I ask a question? Because now I'm a little confused. Are we saying that the only way that potentially problem employees are identified is via this system?
Absolutely.
Or is there a human element to that results in the supervisor and other colleagues actually noting that there's an issue and bringing that forward? Because I think it's sounding like the entire universe of the possibility of problems is emanating from this particular system, but that's not true.
That's correct. In fact, our goal is to catch a problem before it's an action item. And that's what we do, to speak to the human interaction piece. That's what we try to train all of our supervisors on, how to do the early intervention, where we result in getting a person the needed training in some cases, or counseling, before it ever hits an action item. So that you're absolutely correct in the concern about that. But to answer we can go back and we can find out the action items in a certain period of time, who's been popped in, if it's
I don't mean to
worked.
be limiting to the action items. I mean, this is a risk management issue at the end of the day, and we're all trying to accomplish the same thing, to reduce the problematic behavior.
Yes.
So if you have an early warning system, which comes before the action items, terrific. I'm glad to hear that. Again, I would suggest that given the amount of money that's gone into this and the amount of administrative support that's going into it now, that you at least take that one basic approach from, no matter how you've identified the problematic behavior with the employee, and then there's an intervention, look at what's happened after that. You have a cohort to compare with initially, and now you can see whether that employee's behavior has improved, continued the same, or actually gotten worse. And I'm not telling you how to do that, but it seems to me that is not that complicated.
It's the complication. Well, actually, to review teams and to do what you're saying is not complicated. We can easily do that. The other piece is actually quite complicated, but we certainly can work with the Inspector General, with Office of Operations, and try to figure out, because so many of our interventions, there's thousands of them that we do every year. So to figure, maybe what we can do is kind of find one test area to try to look at and see.
If I may add, that's exactly what the research group is going to do. The first 4 points in the department's response in here are capturing those things that you just described.
Right.
That's what we've asked them to do.
Good.
And if one were to try to put into context for want of a better term, I don't have another, early warnings, right? And then the subsequent meetings. This slice of the audit report just dealt with what comes out of the team's early warning system, right? It doesn't include the entire universe.
That's correct.
And do you all keep? Yes. Do you keep statistics on the entire universe? So I didn't think so. Right, because I actually don't know of a place that every time an employee is brought in for a conversation that there's going to be a notation made. So I understand what this system is designed to do, but I just want to make sure that everyone understands that there will be coaching, counseling, intervention conversations that go on many, many, many levels that will not be captured by any
system.
Yes.
Right.
And that's one of the things the point you're making points to something that I've struggled with myself, in that how do you prove a negative? What we can't capture with the system is how many times have we stopped somebody from engaging in behavior that they might have otherwise engaged in, just by the fact that they were triggered by an action item, even if it results in no action, made them realize my supervisor's paying attention to me. I've got to correct whatever I'm doing. We can't
So
prove
this
that
consultant
negative.
is going to be dealing with our behavioral sciences people, is going to be doing a lot of.
Yes, they're going to be putting focus groups together, surveying employees that have been impacted
Do we
by
have
the
anything
system.
else before we move on?
No, I would move approval of the item, in addition that the department report back quarterly on the items that it's able to implement as we go forward prior to January of 2016, when we have the consultants.
And I would do a friendly amendment just to say that also the strategy is part of that presentation as well.
Sure.
Okay.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Good. Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 8E, Department's report dated August 22nd, 2014, relative to the Field Training Officer Selection and Training Audit.
Welcome back.
Good morning, Commissioners. Police Performance Auditor Jeffrey Phillips, Officer in charge with Internal Audit Inspection Division.
Assistant Chief Sandy Jo MacArthur.
Commissioners, so before you have the Field Training Officer Selection and Training Audit. This audit was encompassed by 3 audit objectives, and there was 4 tests that were conducted. The department did really well in providing the 40-hour field training officer FTO school. And in essence, what this means is that the FTOs went to that school prior to being assigned with a probationary officer. Just a couple areas that there could be some room for improvement with respect to the selection. Really just paying closer attention to all the forms. There's an array of forms that have to be filled out during that selection process, and so ensuring that the forms are completed in their entirety and that all the forms are included in that selection process. And along the lines with objective number 2, with respect to the team's evaluation report or the TER, you see that there was a 8% that met the standard. Now, there's a systemic misunderstanding with respect to the requirement to fill out these TERs for FTOs. And I'll add to say in a report that will be coming before you with respect to Professional Standards Bureau, we found the same misunderstanding where the TERs were not being completed. So there's a misunderstanding, and some of the feedback that we received from areas was that they thought that a transfer action item was supposed to be completed. Now, the TER is much more comprehensive in vetting individuals or officers when they're selected or transferred, and that's why the FTOs are included in having these TERs completed. One of the things that we thought would be helpful, and we went ahead and made a recommendation, was that the employee selection section, they put out a checklist of all the forms that need to be included when these selection packages are being conducted. And if they were to include all the various positions, such as the FTOs, the gang enforcement details, narcotics, professional standards, if they were to include that in that checklist, perhaps that would go ahead and trigger the supervisors to ensure they completed a TER. That would summarize my presentation with respect to the audit. If you have any questions.
Commissioner Madison.
Yes. Somehow, in reading this audit and trying to understand how and why there's so much confusion around how one fills out the information and what needs to be captured, not having seen the actual documents or anything like that, it makes me wonder whether or not this process is user-friendly. To the extent that there's this much confusion around it, and it feels almost like it's just not explained well, but it's been around for so long. So, I don't get it. So what does it take, and I don't know that I'm directing this to you, but I could be. Right. What does it take to create in this process the instructions so that people, one, understand what they're supposed to be doing?
Right. There was, in addition, in a previous review of this process, there was also some consternation with respect to selection and transfer. And in a prior recommendation, we asked the department to clarify that. They did so. So it's really just putting out the information to the areas and to divisions that they need to fill out these TERs for these specific positions. So, for example, our gang enforcement details, there is no confusion with that. Gang enforcement details are very clear. Narcotics enforcement very clear on the fact that they have to fill out these TERs.
So then it led me to ask the question. Anybody can answer this. Is the absence of the proper information as one becomes an FTO or whatever, Is anyone benefited by this? Does anyone end up having, does bias come into play? Can somebody step into one of these positions without actually having fulfilled not so much the 40-hour training, because we see that everybody's going through the training, but the prerequisites to even be considered? That's what I was looking for in this. Like, you know, and now I'm going to go way out on a limb, but let's say that I know somebody who I'd like to give this plum assignment to, blah, 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 and the person doesn't necessarily have all the qualifications, but, oh, nobody really filled out the paperwork, so next thing we know, that person is in the 40-hour training and is an FTO. Is there room in this process for that to happen?
Well, in the process to become an FTO, it is a pay grade advancement position, so we do hold orals for those positions. So during the oral process, that's part of the selection package that was not reviewed, I don't believe, in this audit, but we in Personnel Division, who's under my command, they review the personnel selection packages all the time to ensure that all of the requirements are met, because that is part of the specific selection process paperwork that is filled out, and we make sure that it's all filled out and it's in the package. So, for example, the standardized questions for FTOs are asked
during the orals.
Per the orals, okay. And the documentation, and we look to see if the justification is appropriately documented, not just checkboxed on the oral application. So we do periodic inspections of those packages, and occasionally both the Inspector General and the Audit Division will specifically audit that piece.
I'm sorry, is the package of questions the same package of questions over and over so that people can actually be prepped in advance to know that these questions are coming?
They're confidential questions, but they do periodically get changed and modified, and there's a series of questions that one can ask. For example, if Matt and I are on a board, we'll have 5 questions of which we can pick one to use, and then we use, so we do this per the civil service rules.
I'm sorry, what I am keenly focused on is a person's ability to game the system and get into a pay grade increase / role without having fulfilled all the prerequisites, and somebody or somebody's making it kind of easy for them to get through. So to the extent that there is a list of, for example, 5 to 10 pretty standard questions, they may come in a combination of questions 2 and 7, may come in a 3 and 9, but if you're slick enough, you will know. No, that can't.
I can explain that, but there's 2 things I can talk about. That one I'll talk about right out of the way, so don't forget. The questions are experiential based. So the questions will be in leadership, in counseling, in coaching, and they have to give an experience. Tell us about a time when you did A, B, C, or D. We've used those very successfully, and you can't really fluff your way through that. If you haven't experienced it and you don't have an experience on when you coach somebody, when you counsel somebody, and then you know the impacts of it, then you can't bluff your way through the questions. So that is what has really helped us a lot in the questions. The TER, the issue with that isn't so much about requirements, because we check to make sure for the FTOs they've gone to the school. If they didn't go to the school, that they're scheduled for the next school and they don't train and things along those lines. The TER really helps us evaluate whether there's a history in their team's report that even though they have these qualifications, that their past behavior is not going to be a problem. That's really what the effect of the TER. And some of the confusion is there's a quick review of a team's report when anybody transfers in versus going into really detail on that. So you hit the nail on the head right out of the chute when we got this. It's about clarification and ensuring that just as our gang units are very much on top of this, and we're working with Office of Operations because that's where the FTOs are, we've revised the notice. It's already in process. It should be coming out very quickly. And where the checkbox is the only thing that we're figuring out. It should be on that checklist, or should it be on the 140? That has to be signed always, because the checklist, as our auditor can explain, has lots of check boxes. And I don't like things important like this to sometimes get lost. So we're just looking at which place the checkbox should be. The notice is already in draft form, ready, fairly quickly going to be coming out. So I think that will help with the clarification. And then I work with the Office of Operations, and Matt Blake and I always work on these things to get that message out. And we get it out in the supervisors' meetings and in the general staff meetings because the supervisors are the ones who are supposed to be reviewing this prior to sending the packages in to their commanding officers. And then the commanding officer's role is to also review the team's reports.
I just want to offer a little bit of comments again and ask some questions. For my colleagues' benefit, this is not a new issue. The problems with the field training officers itself, those problems are an old issue. It goes back to the Christopher Commission. I've only been here 7 years, but I've seen multiple audits about field training officers with these exact same problems. And so I'm completely flummoxed by this statement that there's this confusion about how to implement this. And I am optimistic that the next time you come back, we won't hear this again. But we have heard it before, and I personally have heard it more than once. And why does this matter? It matters because the training officers have in their hands the employees who are being trained. They're setting the culture of the department. And the language back to the consent decree final report is so clear. There was disturbing evidence that many FTOs openly perpetuate the siege, we, they mentality that alienates patrol officers. That goes back to the Christopher Commission. Now up to the consent decree, and I'm reading from the monitor. The decree requires the LAPD to continue to implement a plan to ensure that FTOs receive adequate training and regular and periodic retraining to carry out their duties. And at the very end, the monitor says, the monitor is confident that going forward, the department will ensure that field training by the LAPD follows the best practices of law enforcement. The monitor offers the following recommendation regarding the FTO program. The LAPD should ensure that FTOs are evaluated annually using the new standards-based assessment. And based on this audit, I find it hard to see that we are doing what we need to be doing. And so that's my frustration.
I understand your frustration. If you recall in all of the audits, the training was a big component. We're hitting 100% on the FTO training. And that's been the last couple of audits. In terms of the qualifications, that's not the issue in this audit. I do agree with you. I'm frustrated that the audit, we still have an area that is so significantly low. But we have made huge improvements because the biggest problem we had when we first started with the consent decree was nobody had attended FTO school. If they had, we couldn't find the paperwork on it. Very few people, this is years ago, very few people had attended the update school, and we had people in positions who had a significant history. Today, those aren't what you find in our FTOs. We have 100% of the 40 hours. The one that we did do where it was 50%, that was 2 people. And it was an anomaly on the one individual. There was a discipline issue involved, which I can't go into. So that was an unusual thing. The training, we're very proud of the fact we've worked really closely with with Office of Operations to ensure those key components aren't. The review is to look at their discipline history. The TRE is just one, unfortunately, I'm not saying it's just one, I think it's an important piece. Why there's confusion now? We don't know, but we're planning on fixing it. But I am proud of the fact that we have come a long way from the issues you just read about.
I agree with you.
And I know you do see that with me.
Can you tell me when there's likely to be another audit of this
TREs?
whole process, the FTO process, however you want to describe it?
Off the top of my head, I cannot, I don't know if it's on the next annual audit plan, but of course, just like any time, if this commission feels that we should revisit this within a certain time, we could absolutely get that done.
Can I ask, so the audit is one thing. The confusion around this form, right? the checkbox, not checkbox, where it's placed, all of the above. Are we suggesting that that's what's resulting in this 8% completion rate?
Right. So it's
A technicality more than anything?
It's the correct form not being completed. This TER not being completed.
Right, but the how do I say this? The elements have been completed. It's just the form hasn't been completed correctly, right?
Some of the elements having, and not, just by looking at these, even if it's by looking at both forms, this is the TER, which up on the left side is what's required. There's phone calls that have to be made. The transfer action item is not as comprehensive.
Okay, so what I think, Rob, of course an audit is in order, but most importantly, it feels like those forms, that form needs to be fixed, adjusted ASAP so that, forgive me, it's idiot-proofed. Because if that's what is resulting in the 8%, and if we agree that that's what's resulting in the 8% completion rate, that it's complicated, they don't know, can we just fix the form?
Commissioner, may I just weigh in? I understand, fully appreciate, and embrace the Commission's concerns. My commitment to you, and I've been here before on not necessarily this question, but on previous areas where we found to be deficient, substantially deficient in some areas, my commitment to you is that we may be back here again, but it won't be on this.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Let's have a motion.
Move we accept the report.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Commissioner Kim has a statement to make.
Well, I guess the vote went as anticipated.
8-7.
It was a unanimous vote, but I had a dissenting public comment, highly critical of yeah. Well, I'll tell more details there. It was comical. I mean, it was, it wasn't.
I'm sure it was public, so
it was a public comment.
So are you back with us?
Eva can tell us about it. I don't. Yeah, Eva can share with us later.
Is your statement, however, that you are still on the commission?
Oh yeah.
Okay, great. Yay.
Welcome back. Okay.
Okay, item 8G, Department's report dated August 22nd, 2014, relative to the sick/injured on-duty coordinator audit.
Commissioners, in regard to this sick IOD coordinator audit, and there was 3 objectives, 3 tests that were done, and I think the best way to just summarize the results of this audit is by looking at really what the overall finding was. And the overall finding with this audit was the fact that the administrative order pertaining to sick IOD coordinators needs to be revamped. And that was the recommendation that was made, because it is a 15-year-old order that really does not reflect the realities of today's operations. And it is my understanding that that order is already in the process of being rewritten.
Yes, the order is almost completed. This is something that actually we've been working with the Police Commission Executive Director, Mr. Tiefank, and the Union and Personnel Department on a variety of things for our sick and IOD piece. He's right, it's 15-year-old administrative order, but it's also like a 45-year-old policy that's been in place. And some of the things that we found in this audit were just really silly. We had people in every division contacting our people, but we weren't getting credit for it because it was actually the sick and IOD coordinator who was contacting them. We cannot figure out why in the 1999 order, why it was stated the way it is, but we are in the process of reviewing that right now. One of the things that the task force that we've put together, working with all the different entities, we realize that sometimes the best sick and IOD coordinators are not the supervisors, and the supervisors are so few and far between out there that oftentimes it is our civilian personnel or our P2 who's experienced a sick and IOD issue themselves, who end up being the better sick and IOD coordinator. And the fact that our policy said they shall be part-time didn't make sense to us. So we are very quickly going to get a new order out. And hopefully that'll address the issues that were identified here. But there's a bigger piece that we're working on in terms of our sick and IOD system itself with the city, so that we're ensuring we're offering our employees the best service, and that in the bigger picture, it gets people back to work faster, making sure they're getting the treatment they need, making sure they know somebody at the department is concerned, and things along those lines. So this OO is on top of it right away, because they don't want any of us to be in violation of the order, but we've worked together to get that new order out. Should be signed within the next 2 weeks.
I just want to make sure I understand. I'm looking at the summary of the findings on page 2. Thank you. Unless there's more comment, I would move approval and an instruction that the department report back to us on progress on this issue and the broader issues that the chief mentioned by October 15.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Let's go to public comment.
We have one comment card. Davon Williams.
Welcome.
Thank you. Excuse me if I start spinning up a little bit. I've been having a few seizures this morning. But my name is Davon. I'm from the Youth Justice Coalition. So first, I hear, as I've been sitting here, you're creating some kind of data tracking system. And as a few of you said up there, I see, and having that just sitting on a computer system, what action is that going to be taking later? And as well, I think there needs to be a second party, which would be the public, because, and you guys holding each other accountable, being that you're, I don't know, family, friends, or whatever, I can't think of the right term for that, but you're on the same team, I guess what I'm saying is you'll look out for each other. So there needs to always be,
take your time.
Okay, sorry, just minimal money. Always needs to be public involved. Other things I would like to talk about is the Iselle Ford case, which was mentioned a little earlier. YJC did put that together, or help put that together. And a few questions I have about that. From what I heard or known, that some of the officers already know that he had a mental illness. So one question is why was not the mental health department contacted before, or whatever step you would do to take before anything like that went down any further to go what it was, if you guys already knew something was wrong with him? Question 1. Question 2, how is the officer who killed him being held accountable right now?
Keep going. You can give him another second.
1 second.
Take your time.
And taking your approach or thoughts or things towards community members different. We are not animals. We are people, and treat us like people. There's always constant stop and frisk in my neighborhood, as well as in Ford's neighborhood, and just a lot of people in the lower income neighborhoods. There's always that. So changing your approach and view towards us.
Take your time.
If I could just add to what Iselle Sower's friend, we're just trying to find a way to get a third party to help hold this officer accountable. If we could just probably take a card from the Inspector General, we'll follow up and try to get a meeting with him to ask some questions that the community also had at the forum.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you. We're now in item 10, closed session. The Board of Police Commissioners will now recess into closed session to discuss item numbers 10A1 and 2 in accordance with Government Code 54957.
I'm Chris. I'm an Iyengar yoga teacher here in Los Angeles, and you're watching LA City View, Channel 35, Our City, Our Channel. Namaste.
Hello, welcome to Connie Martinson Talks Books. My guest today, Lauren Miller, has written a marvelous novel that will take you, and it's called a young teen book, but I have to tell you, I must be a young adult because I loved every minute of it. It's called Free to Fall. It's published by Harper, but Free to Fall is from John Milton's poem, Paradise Lost, and we will discover why. Welcome, Lauren Miller.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I tell you, I've got the notes to prove I couldn't stop reading it. Now, let's tell our friends a little bit about Rory, who's been accepted into a school called
Eden Academy.
And she is the daughter of someone who had gone there, but her mother died in childbirth with her.
Right, and Rory grew up having no idea that her mom went to this prestigious prep school on the East Coast. Rory grew up with her father, a single dad, in Seattle. She was this kind of self-proclaimed nerd who loved school, loved to learn, but didn't feel any connection to kind of East Coast privilege and academia at all. But she had this dream to go to this school that she'd heard about called Eden Academy in Massachusetts.
And if you're accepted, everything is paid for.
Everything is paid for. All the room and board and even the flight there and back. You know, it's sort of this golden ticket to life, as Rory calls it. So she applies thinking there's no way I'll get in, and of course she does.
And the year is what,
2030 when we meet.
And she will now be the class of 2032. Right. It's only a 2-year school.
It's a 2-year program for juniors and seniors, really college preparatory in that sense. So.
And she has to leave behind her father, who's a remarried widower, and also a boy named Beck.
And Beck has been Rory's best friend growing up in Seattle, and Beck is an artist. He's a guy, a photographer specifically, who likes to follow his gut and take really edgy photographs of things around the city. And he's a little countercultural, I'd say. Rory is a follow the rules, make really good choices kind of girl, which is really the journey that she comes on. And Beck is a little bit different. He likes to sort of trust his instinct on things.
And she has her iPad, her iPod, her iPhone, and if she asks the phone questions, it will tell her, you're not dressed right, the weather is bad. That comes from a voice called Lux.
Right. So in 2030, this is something that's true of the world. Everybody uses this app on their phone called Lux, and Lux is a decision-making app, and it helps you make the decision that'll give you the most personal happiness. So everybody uses it, so life runs smoothly. It directs traffic. It tells you when to leave so that your commute will be short. Has the parking spot already allocated for you, so you don't have to wait and look for one. Tells you what to order at a cafe, everything. Just leave it up to Lux, and life will be happy.
But there is another voice. Right. That's in your head, though, isn't it?
Yes.
Doubt.
The doubt. It's a name given to the inner voice by medical professionals once they discovered that this voice is something that you shouldn't listen to because it's irrational. And the goal of society in 2030, which perhaps isn't so different than our goals today, are to make the most rational, best choices.
Now, our friend Rory has a limited income.
Right.
But she discovers there's another girl at school had never been her friend, never went to think, knew she considered Rory a nerd, named Hershey. And Hershey, the two of them have been accepted in this phenomenal school, and she's sort of wondering, why is she being my friend?
Right. It's interesting. I think two things are going on with Hershey and Rory. The first is I wanted to explore this sort of validating thing that happens when someone